Hi, my name is Jessica Goodfellow, and I'm here to talk to you today about craft. And I'm really grateful to Liz for inviting me to do that. What I want to talk to you today about is using sound as opposed to sense or meaning in your poems, or in addition to meaning. Um, an excellent point of following sound in the poem as opposed to following sense or following meaning or trying to tell something that you have thought through is that the sound, if you haven't got meaning or you haven't got a point that you know what you want to make, you can begin with sound. I'm going to show you a poem that really began with interest in a sound. That'll be the first thing I show you. But I also want to tell you that even if you've begun with meaning, if you've begun with sense, like if you're writing a lyric poem or a narrative poem, and you get to a point where you're stuck in the poem, if you look around at the letters and the sounds that you're using in the poem and you make connections based on those, that can propel you forward, even though you don't have anything meaningful that you want to say at that point, or you don't know what to say with meaning. And it's not really a problem. You're not going to go into nonsense poetry at that point, because the human mind is such that it makes connections, it looks and it seeks connections, so that even if you start with sense and you follow sense, your brain will make those connections for you, and it will end up being interesting, unusual connections and word choices that you wouldn't have made following meaning only, and yet you will end up with sense. So following sound, that will lead you to sense, and that's a really interesting way to get to new and interesting word choices and lines. Another good thing about it is if you've read Robert Bly's Leaping Poetry, he talks about the importance of trying to access your unconscious mind to make the leaps between ideas that your conscious mind isn't going to be able to make. And if you follow sound, you'll be able to do that. You'll be able to hear that, oh, this word sounds like that word, and your mind will put together some kind of relationship between it, because your mind is trained to do that, and also your unconscious mind will step in and help you with that. Another really good point is that languages are made over time by a lot of different, hundreds, millions of people using them, and collectively the wisdom of the people goes into the language, so that when you use a language and you use words that sound the same, a lot of the times they sound the same because they are related, either by etymology or just by onomatopoeia, which is when words sound like what they mean. So all that collective experience of all the people who came before you using this language has gotten encoded into the language and the sounds, and so you can access that when you follow sound as opposed to following logic. Although I'm not saying abandon logic. I'm just saying it's another tool. So I'd like to start with a poem that I wrote based on sound. I was laying in bed at night listening to the sound of the rain on the roof, which I think is really soothing. And then I was thinking about how the sound of a river, we have a river in our neighborhood, it's a really soothing sound. And I was thinking about how, though they're both really soothing and they're both really water-based, I would never confuse the two sounds. And then I was thinking about oceans. Oceans played a big part of my childhood, so I find that sound really soothing and pleasant, and also completely distinctive from the sounds of rivers and rain. And I thought I would like to write a poem about that. So I wanted to write a poem, and I thought, well, let me use the things that sound like river and rain and oceans. So what I did was I wrote a letter to all the people that I wrote an email to everybody that I knew, and I said, please write out, spell out with letters what you think rain sounds like, and what you think rivers sound like, and what you think oceans sound like. So I sent this email to just everybody, and of course not everybody answered, but enough people answered that I had like a sampling of how people thought rain sounded. So if you follow so basically, if you were going to spell rain, like write out the sound of rain, like think to yourself, like what letters would you use? And I found that people wrote things like basically like T's, P's, K sounds. These are plosives. If you're interested in linguistics, it's called plosives. If you're interested in like the international alphabet and international phonetic alphabet. So I decided to write a stanza to describe rain using t, p, k, those kind of hard plosive sounds. Then I looked at all the letters that people chose to describe rivers, and they chose a lot of R and L sounds, like which are called liquid sounds in phonetics. And so then I wrote a stanza using those words with those sounds. So it's sort of onomatopoetic, but not quite, because the words are not supposed to sound like rivers, but all taken together with lots of R's and L's. I hope that the stanza sounds onomatopoetic. Then the ocean, people said they chose sh, sh and k and noises, which are unvoiced. Basically, there's no voice. It's just the sound, air being pushed through your mouth, and they're fricatives. So it was really interesting. Like, there was a real consensus on the sounds that people chose. So I used those sounds, and then I used in the end a final. So there's one stanza for each of those, and then there's a final stanza sort of to tie the poem together. So here it is. It's called Chance of Precipitation, and I hope that you can hear first the rain, and then the river, and then the ocean in this poem. Okay, so here it is. Chance of Precipitation. Rain's tonal ticker tape, tarmac tarantella, rooftop timpani, water glitterati, articulate in triplicate. River all glissando glossolalia, liquid limerick, wet tessellated, littoral lateral lullaby. Ocean's hush-hush hoodoo, whispering womb, chez chartreuse chanteuse, fugue soothed in blue, a wish awash in white noise. The insomniac longs to transliterate rain into a human alphabet, French maybe, a lullaby, a chanson, a hymn, a baptism of sleep as unstable as water. Okay, so I hope you could hear the onomatopoetic sounds throughout the stanza, as not in the word. Each word was not onomatopoetic, but the stanza was, I hope. That was the point. Okay, now we talked a little bit about when you get stuck in a poem and you want to propel yourself forward, you can use sound, the kind of sounds that you're already using in the poem to move forward. So you can use alliteration, which is using the same consonant sounds that are already being used. That can be you can use them at the beginning of words, you can use them in the middle of words, at the end of words, but just repeating the same consonants. You can use assonance, which is noticing the vowel sounds that you've been used already in a line or in a stanza, and try to use those. Like, let's repeat those same vowel sounds to move forward. That's called assonance. And assonance is really, really good for setting tone, because the vowels have very, very different tones. Like ooh, that gives you a definite like tone. Ah, e, it. These are different tones. So assonance is a really good way to set tone. You can use rhyme, words that rhyme, or near rhyme, which is also called slant rhyme. Things that are not quite rhyming, like moon and tomb. So they almost rhyme, moon and tomb, but not quite. So you can use that. That's a good way. Internal rhyme is usually is a really nice way to not end rhyme, but you can also think about like using not exactly the same consonants, but consonants that are the same in phonetic, who are formed in the same part of the mouth, basically. So if you like the word like p and b are formed exactly in the same place in your mouth, but one is voiced. B has your voice behind it, and p doesn't have your voice behind it. It's called voiced and unvoiced. So the same is true for like k and g and s and z. These are all formed in the same part of your mouth, and so they're related to each other. So when you're thinking about using alliteration, repeating of consonants, you can also repeat consonants that are really similar to each other. You can look at the International Phonetic Alphabet to find out like which ones are like that, or you can just enjoy noticing it yourself. Another thing to use is homophones, which are words that sound exactly the same but have different meanings. And that, if you use a homophone, like repeat, you end up repeating exactly the same word, but they're different meanings, so they propel you in different directions. So I want to read you a poem. I had this idea to write about crows, and all I had in my mind was the idea that crows are really, really intelligent, and they don't forget the faces of people who are mean to them. So I wrote that down as the first line, and then I was like, well, what do I do from there? I don't know what I'm doing. So then I started to think about the sounds. So here, if you look at Crow's Reckoning, the first line says, a crow remembers who crowded it out of the trash can. So we have assonance, crowded out, trash can. Who cast at it sticks and rocks and rockets fashioned from bottles. So I was like, okay, what do they throw? Sticks, rocks, rockets. These are all sounds like so the same sound as their bottles. So what I did was continually through this poem use the sound to propel the poem forward. I also tried to use a lot of C sounds because crows make a cawing sound, so I wanted you to hear like a caw, caw. So there's a lot of words that use C. And then later in the poem, you can see that I use the word seeded, and I use two different homophones. Seeded as in planting seeds, and seeded as in like leaving a union of some kind, like seceding. And so all throughout this poem, to move it forward, because I only had really one idea, actually two ideas, but I didn't have a lot of ideas, and I wanted to move the poem forward. I used sound, and the sense fell into place right after that. There is no problem with sense. So let me read it to you, and listen for the sounds that repeat. Listen for the homophones. Listen for the C sounds of the cawing of the crow. Okay, so here we go. Crow's Reckoning. A crow remembers who crowded it out of the trash can, who cast at it sticks and rocks and rockets fashioned from bottles. Long after you have forgotten, the crow remembers your face, the space between your eyes, the rise of your cheek, your beakless maw, and with caw both credo and credocore, the crow causes you to recall that gardens are, by their nature, not nature, but the cult of cranium over creation, a human rebuke cloaked in clover and coxcomb and crocus. A crow says, if a garden is not God-rung, then who seeded the Garden of Eden, crux of the human cradle, till seeded by Adam, and even then who, do you suppose, forspoke the stain of Cain, if not a crow or a murder of crows? So you can see I also used some rhyme. I went from face to space, from eyes to rise, and cheek to beakless when I'm talking about how the crow remembers your face. A lot of wordplay. Murder has double meanings in this. So basically, I used sound to propel myself through this poem when I had the one idea about crows, and I had an idea about gardens that I wanted to put in there too. But other than that, I didn't have a lot of ideas, and so instead of following the meaning, I followed the sound, and the sound brought me to meaning. So I hope that's useful. I hope you can find ways to use sound in your writing, both as a genesis and as a way to access the logic, access past the logic into what's embedded in the language, the wisdom that's embedded in the language, and it's as a way to reach into your subconscious or unconscious mind and make those big leaps and find interesting things to say. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you. Bye-bye.